Mariana, and I'm the chair of the Political Education Committee of Philly DSA. Thanks for coming out to our Marxism and Politics Lecture series. We're really excited to have Dustin Guastella and Jared Abbott here. And before I let them take it away, I wanted to offer some really brief introductory remarks about the Marxism and Politics Lecture series, and then briefly introduce our speakers. So the idea for the Marxism and Politics Lecture series emerged a little over a year ago in the wake of remarkable political and ideological transformations in American politics. As the US entered the new Gilded Age and the political and economic illegitimacy of the system was laid bare, Bernie Sanders' first presidential bid, as well as his current bid, have broadcast to a national audience that a more equitable and just society is possible.
Bernie. Ooh.
Yeah. At the same time, in workplaces across the country, workers are rediscovering the power of collective action. So though unionization rates are at their historic nadir, 2019 saw the greatest number of strikes in American history since 1986. So the resurgence of labor militancy and the immense enthusiasm for America's preeminent democratic socialist and the policies he represents mark a sea change in political discourse. With these political developments, there's been renewed intellectual interest in the Marxist tradition, particularly Karl Marx's description of society as a class society. Through this lecture series, our chapter has attempted to cultivate this re-energized intellectual activity by inviting academics and activists who've begun to seriously engage with questions of theory and strategy. This lecture series has focused on questions of method. So how should those who seek to intervene in history go about analyzing and considering political situations? What are the kinds of questions that we need to ask in order to make sense of the past? And what are some generalizable lessons learned from history? And what are the particulars of our present social conditions? So tonight, we're delighted to have Dustin Guastella and Jared Abbott to tackle an issue that is near and dear to socialists. They'll speak about the potential of a socialist party in our time. For the first time in several decades, the US left has the unique opportunity to marshal widespread political and economic disillusionments into a political movement capable of gaining and exercising power. People are getting excited about democratic socialism, and the left has to channel this widespread discontent and newfound receptivity into a coherent and effective strategy. So tonight's lecture will take up a set of strategic issues specifically around the relationship between elections and the broader left pursuit of power. US socialists have struggled with two primary questions, which Dustin and Jared will talk about, which is what type of organization is best suited to the left's goals, and how does a responsible and effective left relate to the Democratic Party? So through considered analysis of the barriers imposed by existing institutions, the electoral system, and the Democratic Party, as well as big money donors, they're going to propose a solution, which I won't spoil, but it will have the potential to mobilize working class voters disillusioned with the Democratic Party. So really briefly, Jared Abbott is a PhD candidate in government at Harvard University and a member of Boston DSA, and Dustin Guastella is Director of Operations for Teamsters Local 623 and a member of Philly DSA. And toward the end, there'll be a Q&A moderated by Melissa Nashek, but in the meantime, I'll let them take it away.
Hello, everybody. I'm just going to time myself so I don't go way over, which is a risk. Sorry. Okay, cool. Okay, oh shoot, sorry again. Okay, great to be here. I am a member of Boston DSA, but was also one of the founders of Philly DSA back in the day, and I consider myself much more of a Philly DSA than any other DSA chapter that I'll ever be a member of, and I hope to one day leave the exile, which is any other chapter but Philly DSA. So I feel very, a strong kinship to you guys. Okay, so just in case people are feeling anxiety, as I go through the introduction, I just wanted to leave this up here for you. This is Suffolk, who's been the most anti-Bernie consistently in their polling over the last few weeks. I wouldn't put up Emerson, but they're always a softie for Bernie. So it's going to be okay. Probably going to win at least 5 or 6 points. It's great. So what I'm going to talk about in this first part of the lecture, is basically new opportunities for socialist electoral organizing in the United States. Sorry about that, I'm so sorry. Over the last few decades. We argue that basically socialists, I think it's pretty obvious to most of us here, but I want to go into some of the details. We're in a better position for building a socialist electoral vehicle now than we've been in certainly in the last 50 years, arguably much longer than that, depending, we could quibble about that. And we sort of see three basic reasons why this is the case. And I'm just going to go through them quickly. They have to do with, number one, a massive de-alignment of working class voters from the Democratic Party, as the Democratic Party have shifted more toward a focus on middle class and professional voters away from their traditional working class base, which has led to a lot of voters leaving the Democratic Party and also just not being engaged in politics anymore at all in many cases, which we'll talk about. New organizational infrastructures have developed over the last few years, DSA being an important example of that, which could provide the basic building blocks, organizational building blocks for a new socialist electoral vehicle. And then finally, the politics of a socialist electoral vehicle are more popular today than they, I'm not saying party because we're talking about something that's a little bit different than a party, which we'll get into. But basically, we have a super popular platform. And all these things together mean that we have opportunities for building a real electoral coalition. So just to give you, just to go through these quickly, I'm sure we're all familiar with some of the basic, decline in sort of living standards of the working class over the last few decades, but just to go through a few very briefly, I'm using sort of working class and sort of professional and middle class voters as a sort of comparative benchmark. As we all know, working class incomes have stagnated over the last few decades as professional middle class incomes have gone up. We know that, well, maybe you don't know, but in survey after survey, it shows that a steady decline in the subjective evaluation of your class position, if you're a working class person who might have used to think of yourself as middle class, now you think of yourself as working class or poor, compared to the PMC where we see a very little change over the last few decades. You see just general sense of happiness has gone down dramatically over the last few years among the working class, and the stats for the professional middle class are a little bit less pretty, and there's a lot more variation, but there's no clear trend basically. And so at the same time as the working class is facing, basically a shitty future and, an increasing sense of desperation and lack of opportunity, the professional middle class is doing fine, and the Democratic Party is shifting its focus to those voters, the professional middle class voters, and away from the Democratic, or from their base in the working class since the 1980s, and especially since the 1990s, with the sort of DLC revolution with Bill Clinton. And so we can see the sort of results of this are a pretty serious de-alignment of working class voters from the Democratic Party. There were, upwards of, 45% of the working class were members of the Democratic Party in the 1980s. And today, that's down to about 28%. So massive de-alignment from the Democratic Party. And in general, in countries where this happens, where you see a de-alignment from the two traditional parties, this is the point when you can see the emergence of some sort of new party to sort of fill the gap. And that's what we're going to sort of talk about today. Some people argue, well, this has a lot to do with just sort of white working class people in the South in particular, just sort of jumping ship from the Democratic Party because, they don't like the sort of more progressive cultural direction of the Democratic Party. But as you can see, the Republican Party, especially since the end of the Reagan Revolution, is seeing declines in working class voters as well. So it's not as if most of these folks, especially since the late 80s, are jumping ship to the Republican Party. They're just leaving politics altogether. You can see here that the folks who are political independents are not over time going to the Republican Party. If anything, you can see that many of them, this is just the folks who are not members of either party, but who say they lean one way or the other. There's been a pretty significant increase in, the independents who actually say that they lean Democratic rather than Republican. So this isn't the case of, this group of working class voters just sort of abandoning the Democratic Party for a Republican alternative. Quite far from it. And so basically, the idea here is that this is political independence, and it's about the number of people that are political independents and who don't lean Republican. We're basically just sort of excluding lean Republican from this discussion, just as a conservative estimate of those are people that would be much harder to attract toward sort of a socialist electoral project. A lot of them could be attracted toward our project, so that's a different question. But we're sort of excluding them from the analysis. And if we do that, it turns out that about 27% of the adult US population are people that are political independents and who are non-Republican leaners, okay? And of that group, about 75% of them are working class, right? And of that group, so that means 75% of this 7% of Americans are people who are disillusioned with the Democratic Party, who would be interested in the political project that we're offering, basically. And of those, about 50% don't vote. Right? So we're actually talking about 10 or 12% of the US adult population are sort of non-voting working class independents who could be drawn, who could be mobilized into a new political project. And when you consider the fact that only about 14% of the US adult population voted in the Democratic primaries last time in 2016, if we could even mobilize 3 or 4% of these non-aligned or non-affiliated independent working class voters into a socialist electoral project that's running candidates. We'll get into this in the Democratic Party ballot line. This would amount to a sea change in the electorate of the Democratic Party primaries and could potentially mean a dramatic increase in our potential to actually be competitive in these elections. And as I think Dustin, one of us will probably talk about at some point, historically, it's been the mobilization of these historically sort of excluded or ignored groups, traditionally, like the working class, that has been the foundation, the constituency, for new political parties that emerge on the scene to challenge traditional working class parties. It's more that and less, already engaged political groups. So that's basically what's going on in terms of this disillusionment of working class voters who are no longer engaged. Many of them don't vote, and they're ripe for mobilization by a socialist electoral project. And I'm going to just sort of go through this next part pretty quickly because I'm a little behind. But basically, we're also seeing, as you all know, pretty serious increases in sort of the organizational capacity of the left, broadly conceived, over the last few years, right? Obviously, DSA used to be 7,500 people just a few years ago. Now we have over 60,000. Even though there's a lot of problems with it, our revolution, has chapters all around the country, has a lot of, run candidates in many different places. Even like Justice Democrats, they're running candidates, all across the country. Even a group as kind of, liberal, and maybe a lot of you might not think is great, and I don't either in a lot of ways, but like Indivisible. Like they've had, thousands and thousands of chapters all around the country over the last few years and have mobilized all kinds of new people into basically progressive activism and have created new social networks, new organizational infrastructures, and thousands of these people, tens of thousands, could be the activist base of a new party like this. And if you think indivisibles are just annoying and like we should just ignore them, I would just point out that I know of 3 DSA chapters that were formed as rump organizations from indivisible chapters, right? So I'm just saying there's all these new organizational infrastructures. There's all kinds of new folks that have been mobilized into doing electoral and all kinds of social movement work over the last few years. And that's different than we've seen in at least the last 40 years, right, in the United States. Meanwhile, as Brianna mentioned, the labor movement is still sort of in the toilet, as we all know, but at least we're seeing signs of increased strike activity last year and this year, and obviously we're also seeing increased willingness on the part of especially more progressive unions to put resources into progressive electoral causes, particularly at this point, the Sanders movement. If not the leadership of many of the big unions, many of the rank and file members, and in some cases, union locals and a few national union federations as well. And then finally, we also know, we also know that the politics that a socialist electoral vehicle would have are extremely popular. Medicare for All is 60-70% support, depending on how you word the question. 60-70% of Americans support free higher education and canceling student debt. Twice as many Americans believe that unions should have more influence rather than less in American political life. About 50% of Americans say that they're for the Green New Deal, even when you say that that would involve massive increases in government spending. There is majoritarian support for our politics, right? So when you combine these organizational resources, the new constituency, and the fact that our politics are really popular, things are looking pretty good for a socialist electoral project. But that said, we're still losing really, really, really badly, right? In 2018, to give you an example, our revolution got 7 of its 28 candidates elected. Justice Democrats ran 60 candidates and got 6 elected, and there's basically a lot of overlap between those two groups. There's only like 7 people we're talking about, 5 of whom were already in Congress before these organizations existed. And DSA, as we all know, got 2 of our candidates elected, although we didn't do it. 2 of our members were elected to Congress. So we have, like 7 people in Congress that are endorsed by one of these progressive organizations, only 3 of whom, I think 3 were basically mobilized into the political process by one of these new progressive organizations. We have more candidates that have been elected at local levels and state levels, but if you do the math, we, combined with our revolution, Justice Democrats and DSA, we have 0.01% of elected offices in the United States are now in the hands of socialists. 0.01%! So we have a really long way to go. And the question is, why is this so hard? Why are we still failing really badly, even though it seems like things should be looking up for us? And that's what Dustin's going to get into now, to talk about some of the major barriers that have that continue to impede our work.
Hey everybody, sorry, I have come down with what I think might be coronavirus. No, I'm ill, but I don't think it's dangerous. But we'll see. I mean, you guys will find out, right? All right, so I'm going to talk about what Jared said, the challenges, right? This number is kind of embarrassing, especially given the sheer amount of media coverage socialists have gotten over the past 3 or 4 years. It seems as if we're Tea Party, like we're the Tea Party of the left. The Tea Party of the left absolutely wipes the floor with us. They got so many more candidates elected.
40 House
reps, 40 congresspersons for the right in their insurgent campaign. We have 3. And one of them, or we had 4 in the squad, right? And one of them immediately jumped ship to Elizabeth Warren the moment that things got tough. So this number is really embarrassing. But I want to talk about why it's embarrassing. It's not embarrassing because, as Jared showed, we have the potential, right? There is a massive de-aligned working class base out there that likes our politics, that is frustrated with the Democratic and Republican establishment, and that wants some change. Well, there are 3 big things standing in our way to winning a majoritarian government. And those are the state. The political system itself in America is one of the most undemocratic and unrepresentative systems in all of the advanced industrial world. The Democratic Party itself, which is a remarkably oligarchic structure that really disciplines the hell out of candidates, no matter how progressive they are when they start. The party itself can really do a number on any candidate, no matter how earnest. And finally, money. No other advanced capitalist democracy has as much money just pouring into its elections year after year after year. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So first, we'll start with the state. So James Madison, when he was writing the Federalist Papers, was very clear that he did not want a democratic system. And more than that, he did not want parties. So this is something a lot of people misunderstand about the American system, is they assume that it is anti-third party. The reality is the American system is anti-party as such. And James Madison said that the great object of the American Constitution was to prevent the formation of parties themselves. So Unfortunately, he didn't succeed there, but what we do have is a really strange party system. We have a tendency toward two massive parties that have really loose fingers throughout the entire country and that have a very weak internal structure, but a total lock on the political duopoly, which seems kind of counterintuitive. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how it is that these massive parties can operate in such a strange and loose way. So the first thing to know is that, one, the American legislative system has more districts than any other advanced democracy. Does anybody know how many elected positions there are in the United States? Jared, you can't answer. 513,000. 513,000 elected positions. Now, anybody trying to form a real, genuine majoritarian government across all levels is going to realize that an organization taking on that large of a task is going to be in for some trouble. Because all along the way, there are competing interests fighting for competing votes and stuff like that. Now, the other feature, so just the sheer number of elected offices is one big stumbling block. The other feature is that we have what are called winner-take-all single-member districts. So that means that if you get a plurality of votes in your district, you monopolize power for that entire district. This means that parties are really disincentivized from running minoritarian candidates. Instead, the incentive is to combine with other larger constituencies, larger interests, to take on one of the two major parties in that congressional district. So you can see very quickly how even earnest political actors can find themselves struggling to create a majority in any single legislative district. So they sort themselves into two giant camps with all sorts of contradictory interests inside them. It's also the case that these zero-sum contests mean that small differences in vote share have huge impacts in who gets represented in Congress. And so what happens a lot of the time is the Democrats can win, or any left-wing party, can win a majority of the votes. In fact, a supermajority of the votes, and lose the majority of the seats, right? So in 2018, the Democrats actually captured 12 million more votes than the Republicans in Senate races across the country. And they wound up with a significant minority in the Senate. That's a completely unrepresentative democratic system. I mean, it's hard to even call it a democratic system, right? Beyond that, we have the problem of presidentialism. When candidates in major parties run for president, they split the vote down the middle to compete between two big behemoth candidates. And you have to pick between two people that you really don't like, right? And that's the way the presidential system works in this country. Now, when you combine presidentialism with what we call first past the post electoral rules, it means that minor parties are constantly facing the problem of spoiler, right? If they go out on a limb and they try to establish themselves as a minor party, they're going to find themselves accidentally electing a party that is furthest from them ideologically. Candidates and voters are smart enough to realize this is not something that they can do for a very long period of time. And it's why American third parties have had such a hard time breaking out beyond their ideologically committed small cadre of people, rather than actually mobilizing the vast number of people who in many ways, policy-wise, agree with them. So this is the problem of trying to start a third party in the United States, or trying to start any real party in the United States. And Jared's going to talk about what the difference between third parties and non-third parties. He's going to talk about the difference between internally mobilized parties and externally mobilized parties. So the obstacles are so apparent that what has happened since 2016 is smart organizations like DSA, Justice Democrats, and Our Revolution have realized that the quickest way to surmounting many of these obstacles is to use the Democratic Party ballot line, to rent the Democratic Party ballot line. So this brings us just past the Madisonian labyrinth, right? Now we can compete in Democratic primaries. We get rid of a lot of the problems of ballot access. We get rid of a lot of the problems of the spoiler problem. And now we're facing off against the Democrats. But this opens up the problem of the Democratic Party. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the Democratic Party as it exists and what it does to discipline candidates. So first, the party itself is not like any party in the world. It is the most decentralized party in the world. There are no dues. You register with the state and not the party to become a Democrat. Those of you who are registered as Democrats in here did not go to your local Democratic Party office to pay your dues to become a Democrat. You went to City Hall or some like DMV organization, and that's how you became a member of a political party. That's bizarre. It makes no sense that a private political party is so enmeshed in the bureaucratic functions of the state that you're going to bureaucratic buildings to register to become a member of the party. Now, the other thing is they're completely ideologically amorphous. And so one of the most striking things about the American system is if you name every major political slogan, presidential slogan of the past like several decades, you won't find a single political content in there. Make America great again. Hope and change. Right? What are these? Morning in America. These are anti-political statements. They don't actually have an ideological core. They're basing it on hoping that you read into something that you like in those messages. This anti-ideological part keeps a lot of people in the tent that otherwise don't have the same ideas. Now, the challenge to actually taking over this party is really great. It seems like we can use it, and we can use it to great effect. But we can't exaggerate the decentralized nature of the party because it's combined with the extreme concentration of power in the top. In the top of the party, in the DCCC, the DSCC, and the DNCC, this is where party politics happens in the Democratic Party. And so if you look at the Democratic Party, there is no direct election of the leaders or the officers of the party, right? Compare this to the Labour Party in Britain, and only 10% of parliamentary Labour Party people have to nominate a candidate, and then it's a one-person, one-vote convention election. That's how Corbyn was able to lead the Labour Party in such a short order. For the Democratic Party, who is the current leader of the Democratic Party?
Tom Perez? Tom Perez?
Tom Perez, right? No, it's Nancy Pelosi. The leader of the Democratic Party is not the leader of any committee inside the Democratic Party. It is the leader of the majority party Senate or House seats in Congress. If the president is Democrat, then it's the Democratic president. If they have a congressional majority, it's the Speaker of the House. If they have a Senate majority, it's the Senate majority leader. If they're in the minority of everything, it's the minority leaders in the parties. Think about what that does. It means if we want to deselect Nancy Pelosi, as let's imagine we're all dyed-in-the-wool Democrats, I know many of you are not, but if we said we hate our party leader, we think she's leading the party in the wrong direction, what do we have to do to get rid of Nancy Pelosi? We have to go to San Francisco, run a candidate in her district, deselect her, and then we have no chance of deciding who the next Speaker of the House is, who the next leader of the Democratic Party is. In fact, the caucus inside the Democrats in Congress gets to decide that. So you might succeed in ousting a Speaker of the House, but you're not going to succeed in getting your person to be the next Speaker. This shows you how concentrated the forces of the party at the highest level are. Now, it has become more oligarchical over time, and the decentralized nature of the low party has been counteracted by the hyper-centralization of the high party. Am I going over time, Jared? Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'll be quick here. This shows party unity votes over the past, from 1970 through 2016. That's a really shocking line. We've gone from having two parties that have basically nothing in common with each other inside themselves to being two parties that now vote at almost 70% on party line votes, right? This is what you hear about all the time in mainstream pundits, that we're so divided, yada, yada, yada. What's really going on here is money. Money is poured into the political system in such a major way that it has created a cleavage in the parties and centralized them through the donor class. So the Democratic Party has a set of donors that have a certain set of policy positions, and the Republican Party has a set of donors that have a certain set of policy positions. As a result, these donor classes have pushed the party in a certain direction. Beyond that, the parties themselves have gotten really involved in spending a lot of money. So just a few signal statistics, and then I'll hand it back to Jared. What we have right now is a system in which, in 1980, top donors of the 0.01% of income earners donated $1.72 million in federal contributions. By 2012, top donors, Sheldon and Miriam Andelson, gave 56.8 and 46.6 million in the 2012 election alone. Parties themselves, in 1992, the DCCC raised $14 million for its candidates. In 2018, the DCCC raised $297 million for its candidates. So what is the effect this has on our people? It has an effect of pushing candidates upward toward the party leadership to get access to some of that great money coming from Nancy Pelosi's office, and rightward toward the donor class policy positions. So even your most earnest progressive, when they get in Congress, has these immense pressures to move toward the party leadership and toward the policy preferences of the very, very rich. So now I'm going to hand it back to Jared. How do we solve this problem? One, we've seen the barriers of the party, of actually creating a third party. Two, we've seen the barriers of the Democratic Party itself.
Yeah, it's funny.
Carousel.
It's like tag team. Okay, this is sounding really bad, guys. We got to find a way out of this. Okay, so basically, oh shoot, I'm forgetting which thing's on which thing. Okay, so basically, what we're proposing is that to not necessarily overcome these challenges, and that's something we'll talk about sort of later. Is like to what extent this, like, we, even under the best circumstances, we could sort of be viable electorally in this country, and the answer is, not like very optimistic, I'd say, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But to the extent that it's possible, we think that there are a couple of things that can be done strategically by a socialist electoral vehicle, and basically, we're using that really cumbersome phrase because we propose not forming a new party per se, because as Dustin mentioned, the ballot access problems and the sort of spoiler problem are such that it makes sense generally for us to run in the Democratic Party primaries, and I'm very happy that more people on the left have sort of come around to that position over the last year or two, although maybe there's strong opponents of it here we can talk about. And so you can sort of solve a lot of the spoiler issue problems by running in the Democratic Party primaries, although there's some other related issues that you can't solve by doing that, which I'll talk about in a second. But basically, we would propose forming something that's like a party, but what we call a party surrogate. And it's basically the same thing as a party, it looks the same, it does all the same stuff, except that it's not a legal entity as a party, right? It doesn't have a party, it doesn't have a ballot line, and it primarily runs candidates through the Democratic Party primaries, sometimes maybe independent candidates or even other socialist parties, depending on the context, but the vast majority would be through the Democratic Party primaries, but completely separate organizationally from the Democratic Party infrastructure, right? So running on the Democratic Party ballot line is not participating in the Democratic Party. Participating in the Democratic Party would be running for ward chairs, running for committee positions, doing all of the stuff that is the infrastructure of the Democratic Party at the local, state, and national levels. And what we're saying is we would create an alternative, parallel institution that would do all of the stuff that a party does, but run on the Democratic Party ballot line, basically. And we think that doing this solves a couple of the problems, or at least mitigates some of the problems that Dustin talked about, primarily related to the money problem, and of course the disciplining effect of having to sort of play ball with the Democratic Party establishment. And so I'm just going to run through this really quickly because we're quite behind already. This was originally supposed to be a 2-hour speech, and now it's got to be down to 4. No, I'm kidding. But it's basically, the way we think about it is that there are basically 2 types of parties. The parties that we're used to in the United States are what the political scientist Marty Schefter called internally mobilized parties, right? And these are sort of basically parties that are, you're kind of used to these. They tend to be formed by, inside the political establishment by elite interest. And most of the decisions that they take are done through sort of elite negotiation, and the constituency is basically cobbled together through sort of pacts made by different elites, regional elites, local elites, who sort of come together and build these sort of alliances to hobble together national coalitions. And as a result, I think as Dustin mentioned, we tend to call these catch-all parties because they don't have any ideological orientation, because they have really strong incentives to not have an ideological orientation, because they want to be able to invite as many different potential coalition partners into the tent as possible, right? And if they take a strong stance on anything, then that could alienate, potential coalition partners. The Democratic Party is like this for sure, but in many other countries, it's actually way worse. Like, you think about like a country like Brazil, for instance, which has like 30 parties in Congress. Parties there, like, they literally have no ideological orientation whatsoever. It's just literally like, the leaders of one state, basically form a pact with the leaders from another state, and one could be more or less conservative, one could be more or less progressive. It doesn't matter. It's just completely transactional. And the Democratic Party and Republican parties are like that, only to a lesser extent. And basically, they're not disciplined by voters very much. They're much more concerned about, so to the extent that they have any policies or they make decisions, they tend to be more concerned about not annoying or pissing off the donors that they have rather than the voters that they have. I mean, you don't want to take that to an extreme. They do care about public opinion to a certain extent, but in general, the disciplining of these parties comes from their donors rather than voters, right? And what we're talking about is an alternative kind of a political party that we haven't really seen any of successfully on a mass scale in the United States. We have seen, like the Socialist Party of the early 20th century was, you could probably characterize it this way, although it wasn't particularly successful. The sort of farmer labor party in Minnesota, Wisconsin, you might characterize this way. The nonpartisan league in Minnesota and North Dakota. There's some examples of things that are sort of like what we're talking about. But basically the idea here is that, and this is sort of how most of the social democratic parties, socialist parties, and labor parties historically have been formed, right? They're completely outside the political system. They don't have any money. They don't have any political influence. And so the only way that they can break into the political system is through a massive mobilization of previously disengaged voters. Historically, we're talking about, the working class who maybe recently got the suffrage and are now being mobilized into the political system, right? And so these folks have to rely on mobilizing a mass of people, and in order to do that, they don't have money. Like traditional parties use patronage, they use clientelism. This is what the Democratic and Republican parties used to do a lot of, very local level handouts, right? Like when you think of political machines, that's how they would win voters. They say, if you vote for my party, you can have, like a small handout or whatever. And in many countries in the world, this still happens on a broad scale. But these guys don't have those resources. They don't have the state. They can't just rob the state, to pay for their electoral campaign. So what can they offer voters? They can offer them a political platform, which, if successful, would dramatically redistribute power and wealth in the country, right? And so they have to offer a real alternative that has accompanying accountability mechanisms. Otherwise, voters won't take them seriously. And those accompanying accountability mechanisms tend to be a relatively democratic internal structure, such that the membership of the party gets to determine what basically the party platform is, gets to have a really strong say in who the candidates are, and is able to sanction candidates and elected officials, sometimes by kicking them out of the party, sometimes by not working in their campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. When those candidates veer from the political platform of the organization, right? And so the parties along these lines also have very strong brands, bad word, but sort of like a party identity. And people are committed to these parties in a way that you don't see generally, sometimes you do, in sort of internally mobilized parties. And that's important for a reason I'll talk about in a second. And also to avoid being, the only way they can make money is to actually just, get dues from their members, right? And so a structure like this is useful for for solving the problems that Dustin talked about of money and of the influence of the Democratic Party for some pretty obvious reasons that fall from what I just said, right? The most important one, which I think the most important one we've seen obviously in DSA races recently is basically, when you have a really strong ground game, which an externally mobilized party can offer because they have a really excited and mobilized and engaged base, they can make up for financial differentials, relative to establishment candidates simply by putting a lot of people on the doors, right? And so maybe your opponent has raised 10 times as much money as you have, but if you can knock 10 times as many doors as they can, this is particularly true in local races and maybe some state level races, much less so at higher levels, although Bernie might be showing that that's less true. That's how you can make up for some of this financial differential, right? And then candidates are also much less likely to bail from any commitments that they make to the party because their success as candidates depends on keeping the base of the party happy, right? If they piss off the base of the party, then those people will not go out and work for them in the next election. They could, actually not even be run as candidates again. They could be expelled from the party. So these folks need to adhere to the party platform. And also, we're talking about demobilized voters in general, or very politically or ideologically committed voters who are much more sensitive to issues of accountability of candidates to a party platform than you'd see in other types of parties. And so you face higher political more severe political consequences if you're a candidate from an externally mobilized party and you betray some aspect of the party platform than you would see in an externally mobilized party, right? And also, the last thing I would add here is that, there are other things that we could talk about, but the last thing I would point out related to the sort of ideological commitment and sort of the brand or the party identity, which is important, is that we're going to face a lot of short-term failures, right? We're running candidates who are often facing extremely uphill battles in winning their seats. And sometimes, like Bernie's a good case where, you run a bunch of times and you lose and you lose and you lose and you lose, and then eventually you win. We need to find a way to sort of deal with that enthusiasm gap, essentially. And basically, by having a good party platform and by having strong and ideological message and committed members, not only is that just a good thing because we want to promote those politics, it's actually a politically useful thing because it can help ensure the maintenance of our party supporters, in sort of lean times when we're actually not doing very well electorally. And that's something that internally mobilized parties just don't have, because if they don't deliver the goods immediately, then they lose support, right? So those are the things that basically help ensure that these parties can be these are the things that would allow a political party surrogate to overcome some of the money problems that Dustin talked about, some of the, obviously the control of the Democratic Party of these candidates helps it to overcome. But even if you had a really great party surrogate, you're still going to face really serious additional obstacles, which you need to find a way to deal with. One of them, which I sort of alluded to earlier, is this problem of there are related spoiler problems that don't go away just because you run on the Democratic Party ballot line, right? And so, for instance, Bernie Sanders shows this pretty clearly. He is somebody that a lot of people in the Democratic Party say, oh, well, he can't be elected against Trump. We know that that's bullshit, but a lot of people say this all the time. This, somebody that's inexperienced or too radical, they're outsiders, they can't get elected. They're not credible, right? So it's a type of a spoiler problem, even if you're running within the Democratic Party. So you need to find a way to build the sort of credibility of your candidates and of your party identity among the electorate in a way that can overcome that kind of a spoiler problem. And also, you need to find a way to overcome the sort of concern, that you're too radical. Even if you're running in a place that's controlled by Democrats, you need to overcome the problem that people are going to say, well, you're not going to be able to play ball with other people in the legislature. You're going to be too radical. You're not going to be able to build coalitions with other members. You're not going to be able to deliver goods for your constituents, right? This is another thing that's going to come up with our people all the time. So we need to find a way to deal with that. And we also need to find a way to deal with the problem that money can be overcome by having a committed, base that goes out and knocks a ton of doors if you're running a city council race. But it doesn't work so well if you're running a congressional race. It doesn't work so well, obviously, if you're running a presidential campaign. Basically, the higher up you get in terms of the office that you're running for, then the more, paid media basically matters relative to, your ground game, right? So we need to find a way to scale up the strategy that DSA people and other groups have done more successfully at the local level, to a higher level, and to expand our success beyond that. And just having a party surrogate without a sort of, thoughtful strategy of the best way to sort of move down the road toward, increasing electoral success is going to be a problem. So I'll hand it over to Dustin to sort of talk about, what a strategy that might overcome this might look like.
All right, I'm going to take it home, guys. You're almost there. Thanks for sticking through it. All right, so as Jared said, now we have this idea of a party surrogate. So let's imagine that we have a DSA type organization that's highly organized, powerful, has some money, runs good candidates, has some ideological cohesion, a shared platform. Let's imagine that we have that. Long way to go. Let's imagine that that's true. Even with that kind of an organization, the tendency is to say, let's run candidates everywhere in the country, buckshot, just anybody who's a good candidate, just run them, because that's how we'll win. The reality is, every Labor and Social Democratic Party that has ever broken into a two-party system has done it with this one weird trick. And it's by building a heartland. They built regional heartlands. And what that means is they concentrated their electoral efforts in one part of the country that was most amenable to their platform and program and that had the kind of constituency to get them over the line, right? If you look at the English Labour Party, this is how it was formed in the Northern Pits. If you look at the Australian Labour Party, New South Wales. If you look at the more modern examples, the New Democratic Party in Canada, the Saskatchewan region, and then in Brazil, the PT formed out of the ABC, the industrial region, the ABC region. So if you look at these, if you visualize the way these parties have actually come to power on a national scale, it's by starting in a concentrated area, kind of working really, really hard to get a few people elected in that area. And then they have this amazing positive feedback loop. Because what happens when you elect 25 state and local and congressional legislators in one concentrated area is you can actually do something. Policy-wise, you can actually flex your muscles. You can stop reactionary bills. You can put more left-wing candidates on the ballot. You can get more policies through government. If you have the exact same number of state legislators, but they're scattered across 25 different states, each one of those legislators cannot deliver a single thing to their constituency. And they just become protest votes, right? So you look at a party like the Green Party, and this has exactly been their problem, time and time again. One of their problems, yeah. They have many problems, but one of their major problems is that they have all these elected officials scattered across all, well, not a lot, but they have a certain amount of elected officials scattered across 50 states, 110 different municipalities, and 5,000 different local governments. Like, impossible to actually form any kind of policy consensus among that kind of group. So what we propose is you take this party surrogate and you say, we're going to New Mexico, and we're going to post up in New Mexico, and we're going to use the national leverage of an organization that has a nationwide scope to put outsized resources into a particular part of the country where the constituency is most amenable to our platform. We could talk about what regions those are. Everybody likes to talk about like which is the best, and we have our own opinions on that. But the main point is that a concentration of votes does a lot of things. One, it helps overcome voter skepticism. Because if you manage to elect 25 people in a single state, suddenly you're not the freaks who just have like the socialism flag flying. You're a serious political organization that people recognize. Two, if you elect those people in neighboring states, suddenly people in other areas close by are seeing some kind of political change in their neighboring area, local area, or state. So it becomes more of a like, oh yeah, this makes sense, this is familiar, this is real, it's real politics, we can do this. We don't have to take this leap into the dark. Finally, when it comes to fundraising, these candidates can campaign for each other and fundraise in a tight, small circuit around where you're campaigning, such that you can raise outsized funds, have outsized influence, and get more candidates to be on the ballot, more excited about the party surrogate, more comfortable taking a risk, which is to say, I'm eschewing all the Democratic Party's money, I'm eschewing all the big donor money, and I'm going with this party surrogate model. So that feedback loop is really important because it really does show that this thing is viable, and it shows what kind of policies you can implement at the national level. You're broadcasting always that we are a party that wants to compete at the national level. And this is what we do when we actually take power. So that's the exciting part. And you can see how in the United States today, there are particular regions of the country where this might be plausible, and places where the voter disaffection is so great, where the economics work out, and where there's enough of a volunteer base to kind of make it happen. But, and now I'm going to call Jared back up here to throw water on everybody. The task ahead of us is so daunting. And we want, like, we say it after every section because we want to remind you that taking this on, this project, is going to be very, very hard. So Jared, you want to talk about why we'll never win?
Yeah, just for a minute, the Eeyore section of this talk. Right, so basically, you know, we just want to emphasize, as Dustin just said, that you know, we have no idea how far a strategy like this could take us. We basically think this is about the best you could do if you're trying to start some sort of new socialist electoral project in the United States. But these objective conditions are so immense that, you know, it's probably more likely than not that you know, this is something that's simply impossible to do, barring some sort of massive, you know, structural change, you know, that's pretty rapid, you know, that completely upends the political system. But you know, we still think that there are major gains that can be made, and you know, it's up to us over the coming years and decades to actually test to see how far we can push this. But the last thing I would say is that, you know, even if we were successful, even if we did get to the point where we had a, you know, a majority in Congress or whatever, like, you know, real power, you know, that would basically just be us getting to the point where we had the opportunity to lose, right? We would get to the point where every other social democratic or socialist party or Labor Party got to a long time ago, and we in the US would finally be at the point where we could compete as a real party at the, you know, at the national level. And at that point, we would face all the exact same challenges, you know, that come with, you know, being part of the current, you know, global economic system that we're under today, which, you know, puts social democratic parties everywhere in extraordinary strategic binds that none of them have been able to figure out how to fix at this point so far, right? So that's a huge separate question that we should talk about, and that's not part of this paper, but it's good to point that out, and, you know, to think about, you know, what are the implications of that, what might be different or the same about, you know, doing some project like this that would be successful in the US, you know, versus other countries that have different economic and social conditions that may be less or more conducive to, you know, sort of policy flexibility on the part of a socialist or social democratic government. But, you know, we need to be really circumspect about what we're doing, you know. It doesn't mean that we're not really excited about the possibilities, you know, that we're seeing, and they're real and they're important. And if Sanders became president, I think that would actually open up all kinds of new possibilities that we can't even imagine right now in terms of mobilizing these sort of voters that Dustin and I were talking about. Also comes with new challenges and problems of potential cooptation, blah, 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 blah. But, you know, that if that were to happen, then we need to have a completely different conversation. But at this point, you know, this is going to be a long, hard slog. There's no guarantee of victory, but, you know, this is something that, you know, is, I think, the best we could probably do. So I'm really selling it as hard as I can, right? All right, so that's it. Sorry for going on.